The Gold Line, a secret war for the Western Empire. The price of Union victory was paid in blood, but its foundation was built on gold. It is the autumn of 1864. The blood-soaked fields of the East have settled into a grim, entrenched slaughter. Sherman is marching on Georgia. Grant is bleeding out at Petersburg. And the entire nation, North and South, is reeling, financially and physically exhausted. Yet, far from the grand celebrated battles of Virginia, a far more critical and secret conflict is raging. A frantic, desperate war for the massive, uncounted treasure pouring out of the newly opened Western mines. This gold, millions upon millions in dust and heavy minted bars, was the lifeblood of the Union. It backed the North's greenbacks, financed the Union Pacific Railroad's frantic westward push, and purchased the cannon and wheat that sustained Lincoln's final war effort. Without it, the North's economy would collapse, the war chest would empty, and the Confederacy would win not by martial prowess, but by fiscal attrition. The Union's most vital, most vulnerable artery was a single rickety line of track running across the hostile, blood-soaked border state of Missouri, the Missouri Pacific Railway. Every week, under a veil of official secrecy, an iron safe inside a designated express car on the Missouri Pacific train number 51 carried a fortune that could change the course of history. And this week, in a dark forested ravine near the small, unassuming town of Centralia, Missouri, that gold train was scheduled to meet a terrifying destiny. A rendezvous orchestrated not by common bandits, but by the most brutal, calculated, and politically motivated killers the Civil War would ever unleash. They were the vengeful specters of the old Confederacy, a terrifying hybrid of guerrilla, outlaw, and soldier, bound by a fanatical ideology and led by a man's name was synonymous with terror, Bloody Bill Anderson. This is the true story of how a single train robbery in the American heartland became the most consequential, astonishing, and forgotten act of sabotage in the final year of the Civil War. Part 1. The Crucible of Centralia, the most dangerous rail line in America. By late summer 1864, Missouri was not merely a border state. It was a fractured land caught in a 4-year-long civil war within the Civil War. Regular armies fought grand campaigns, but in the central river valleys, a shadow war of unimaginable savagery was waged by roving bands of Confederate-aligned bushwhackers. They were not fighting for territory, they were fighting for terror, a scorched earth campaign designed to make the Union's hold on the region financially and politically untenable. The Missouri Pacific Railroad was a prime target. Completed just before the war, it was the key to moving men and materiel across the state and, most crucially, to collecting the immense gold and silver wealth streaming in from the Denver, Montana, and California territories. This treasure was shipped east, first by stagecoach and later by a network of connecting rail lines, funneling ultimately to St. Louis via the Missouri Pacific, from where it would be safely dispersed across the Union. The route was an open invitation to disaster. Every train was a gamble. Union guards, often inexperienced militia, rode with loaded rifles, but the bushwhackers were ghosts. They knew the country, they had local support, and their cruelty was legendary. The stakes for the Confederacy were enormous. Cripple the Union's logistics, and if possible, capture the ultimate prize, the gold. The man who knew too much. The plot to stop train number 51 was a masterpiece of intelligence and operational planning, far exceeding the capability of a simple outlaw gang. It was an act of high-level Confederate strategic sabotage. The intelligence likely originated from the Knights of the Golden Circle, KKG, a powerful and highly secretive Copperhead organization with a vast network of spies, sympathizers, and secret agents embedded deep within the Union's infrastructure. In Missouri, KKG agents worked in the telegraph offices, the post offices, and most critically, the express companies that handled the bullion. One such sympathizer, likely a clerk or agent with the Adams Express Company, the official handler of the gold shipments, must have compromised the schedule and manifest of a particular shipment. The key piece of information wasn't just when the train ran, but when the bullion car would be fully loaded with a significant portion of the West's current yield, a haul worth more than any single Confederate field commander could dream of. The word moved from St. Louis via encrypted messages or hidden couriers across Union lines and into the hands of the most savage warrior in the Western theater, William T. Bloody Bill Anderson. Anderson, just 24 years old, had earned his nickname through a ruthless efficiency and murder. A former member of the notorious Quantrill Raiders, the group responsible for the horrific massacre in Lawrence, Kansas, Anderson had splintered off to pursue a purely terrorist agency. His gang was a terrifying spectacle. Young men, many barely adults, dressed in an unnerving combination of Confederate gray, stolen Union blue, and plain frontier clothing. They rode the finest horses, carried multiple pistols, and were infamous for their practice of wearing a necklace of human scalps, trophies taken from the Union soldiers they executed. This was not a war of honor. It was a war of extermination. In late September 1864, Anderson and his most trusted lieutenants, including a fresh-faced 16-year-old Jesse James and his older brother Frank James, though Jesse's specific role in the Centralia incident remains historically debated, Frank's presence is undeniable, converged on Boone County. Their target was clear, their mission sanctioned by the Confederate High Command: hit the Missouri Pacific and seize the financial foundation of the Union war machine. Part 2. The Massacre on the Tracks. The Fatal Stop. The date was September 27, 1864. Missouri Pacific train number 51, a tired engine pulling several cars, rattled to a halt just outside of Centralia. The bushwhackers, numbering around 80, had taken control of the track, likely by simply removing a section of rail or rigging a false signal. They swarmed the engine immediately, pistols drawn. The conductor and firemen were instantly subdued. The gang, led by a man named George Todd, and with Anderson watching from the periphery, cut the telegraph wires, a classic move to buy maximum escape time, and began systematically moving through the cars. The ordinary passengers, farmers, merchants, and a few women, were robbed of their watches and wallets, but they were spared the worst of the gang's wrath. Then they reached the critical cars, the baggage and express car, containing the prized Adams Express safe, and the passenger cars holding a contingent of unarmed Union soldiers. The ultimate prize. The express safe was a solid iron box, but it was no match for the bushwhackers' tools and determination. Working quickly, they hammered, pried, and ultimately blasted the safe open. Inside lay the wealth of the West, a staggering haul of gold dust, gold and silver bars, and banknotes. In 1864, with the Union's currency perpetually unstable, this was a crippling sum, equivalent to tens of millions of modern dollars. It was more than just a theft. It was a strategic financial strike, the kind of operation the KKG and the desperate Confederate government in Richmond had dreamed of. The gold was quickly bundled into sacks, loaded onto the Outlaws' horses, and prepared for its journey south. The unarmed regiment. The true horror, the element that etched the Centralia event into the annals of Civil War infamy, was the treatment of the soldiers.
Inside the passenger cars were 23 Union soldiers. Crucially, they were unarmed, wearing the blue uniform but traveling on leave after having fought in the horrific Atlanta campaign. They were on their way home, exhausted veterans anticipating a brief reprieve. Anderson's men pulled them from the train, stripped them of their uniforms, and lined them up along the side of the tracks. The air hung thick with terror. The gang's bloodlust was palpable, a chilling contrast to the calculated gold robbery. A defiant sergeant reportedly cried out, "We're not armed, we're prisoners of war." Anderson, cold and unyielding, is reported to have personally stepped forward. He gave a brutal speech, stating that the captured soldiers were simply damned Yankees who had burned and pillaged the South. No mercy would be granted. In a few horrific minutes, Bloody Bill's men executed 22 of the 23 men in cold blood. Only one soldier, a man who miraculously played dead in the midst of the chaos and managed to roll down the embankment, survived to tell the tale. Not content with the murder, the gang mutilated the bodies, a signature of Anderson's brutality, and then set the train on fire, sending a massive pillar of black smoke into the Missouri sky, a terrifying signal that the Confederate Shadow War had officially opened a new, deadly front against the Union's wealth. The ripple effect. The Centralia Massacre and the Great Gold Robbery were more than a local atrocity. The immediate military response, the news of the massacre and the staggering loss of gold shocked the Union command. General Ulysses S. Grant immediately diverted troops, pulling them away from the critical campaigns in the east to stabilize Missouri. Within hours, a cavalry unit, the 39th Missouri Mounted Infantry, was dispatched under Major A.V.E. Johnson to intercept the raiders. Johnson's subsequent ill-fated pursuit of Anderson led to his own ambush and the near-total annihilation of his entire command. Another brutal victory for Anderson that underscored the region's instability. The political impact. The violence fueled the Copperhead movement in the North, becoming a rallying cry against Lincoln's continued war policies. The economic shock briefly rattled the bond market, threatening the funding of the war just as the Union needed it most. The outlaw genesis. For young Frank and Jesse James, Centralia was their bloody graduation. The skills learned and the notoriety gained, the systematic murder, the efficient robbery, the successful escape with an immense haul laid the groundwork for the post-war outlaw careers that would make them legends. The Centralia robbery was their blueprint, a transition from Confederate guerrilla warfare to legendary American banditry. The gold, hidden, exchanged, and ultimately dispersed, bought a crucial, though brief, period of financial relief for the Confederates' covert operations. The violence it unleashed cemented the reputation of Bloody Bill Anderson, ignited a fierce political backlash, and ultimately confirmed that the gold running across the nascent American railroad was not just currency, it was the most valuable, most vulnerable strategic asset of the Union, and its defense would require a new kind of war.